Now, you're very welcome back. So we're turning our attention to a report which is certainly making headlines in the US and beyond as well. And this report details systematic verbal and sexual abuse in the National Women's Soccer League. And the report also admonishes leaders of the US Soccer Federation and the league as well for flagrant failure to act when faced with reports of abuse by players, and that failure to act stretches across a period of years. The report was commissioned by US Soccer, and this all comes on the back of protests. You might remember last October there were players of various teams gathered together arm in arm around centre circles during games to highlight their frustrations with the culture. Very happy to say Jeff Carlisle is a soccer reporter with ESPN. He joins us on the line now. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on.
So Sally Q. Yates, former US Deputy Attorney General tasked with compiling this report, and I presume you might just give us the backdrop for a moment. I presume those protests that we saw last October, the players around the centre circle in games, that prompted this report commissioned by US Soccer?
It did indeed. Yeah, it was about a year ago, almost to the day, that the revelations about a coach with the Portland Thorns, later with the North Carolina Courage. You know, he was accused by some players of engaging in, sexual harassment, sexual coercion. And that was really the first bombshell report to drop. And there's been a steady drumbeat of reports ever since. I think 5 of the 10 coaches in the league, have since been dismissed for abuse and for wrongdoing. And, there was, it happened in Washington, D.C., it happened in Chicago, and it happened in Seattle as well. And so, yeah, it's just been kind of one gut punch after another to the women's game in this country. And so, to the credit of U.S. Soccer, the U.S. Soccer Federation, they immediately engaged Sally Yates, who was a former acting Attorney General of the United States. She brings a lot of integrity, a lot of credibility to the process. And so I think the Federation did the right thing by bringing her on board and her law firm. And so this report has been a year in the making. And it was really, some of the information, a good chunk of the information was already known, but there were certainly more details that were revealed, not only about the coaches who had already been disgraced, but also an additional coach in Louisville who had been fired. Everyone knew everyone knew that he'd been fired, but didn't really know the particulars, didn't know the circumstances of why. And this individual was found to have engaged in sexual misconduct as well. So. And then just the extent to which some of the clubs did not cooperate with the investigation, that was surprising as well, because there's been a lot of lip service paid by clubs throughout the league that, yes, we're going to cooperate, we want to get to the bottom of this, and there were 3 clubs in particular that really acted against the investigators, in some cases tried to impede the investigation. So, a lot of surprising detail came out of this, and now it remains to be seen what changes will be made. I think the onus is on the league to really try to rid itself of some of these bad actors. I mean, obviously a lot of the coaches have been fired, but there are still owners and team executives who engaged in certainly covering up, some of the allegations and providing positive job references in some cases. So that these coaches, who should have been out of the game, were allowed to move on to other jobs. So an incredible amount of detail. And now it remains to be seen what changes are going to be instituted both at the Federation and the league level going forward.
Jeff, I haven't had the time to read the report in full. I've read sections of it and media reporting of it. And the 3 coaches who are very much case studied in this report are named in the report and have been named at large across media, certainly in the States. For legal reasons, we're not naming those coaches in this segment, but certainly they're high profile and well known in the game. As for the nature of the accusations, and again, if anybody listening has children in the car, or if this is a triggering conversation, then I'm going to go into some, not graphic and not for long, but some detail now. So it might be a good time to switch over for a couple of minutes. The nature of the accusations, certainly it seems across the board, Jeff, there is talk amongst the players too, Sally Q. Yates, of just a very sexualised environment as a minimum in general discourse, the language used to the players, the topics of discussion between coaches and players is obviously inappropriate. And then that ranges right up to the very, very serious players invited to watch a film of a match with the coach and shown pornography instead, and the coach masturbated in front of that player. Another instance where there's analysis being done, video analysis, and the player in this one-on-one situation was groped or genitals whenever the film showed that player making a mistake, and clearly a deeply, deeply troubling kind of situation. Nude pictures sent to players by the coach of himself and requesting similar ones back, and players feeling, or one player certainly said felt forced into sending the pictures of herself back. And another coach leveraged his position to coerce at least 3 players into sexual relationships. These are some of the headline anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is horrific. Certainly the film session accusation, that was new. Again, nobody knew why this individual got fired. But it was everyone, certainly a lot of media and a lot of fans have read these reports over the last year. And at a certain point, you think you might become anesthetized to it. But, reading some of the new revelations, I mean, it's a gut punch. It's just horrific every single time. And it really speaks to the power imbalance that has existed between coaches and players. This is the third women's league in the United States since the start of, since 2000 that has been organized, and the previous 2 obviously went under due to financial reasons. And so there's a real, atmosphere and a real fear of, don't speak out against the league, don't say or do anything publicly that's going to put the league in a bad light. And I think that really created a power imbalance, with these coaches where they could make or break a career. And so, some of these coaches obviously felt enabled to engage in this kind of behavior because they knew that there wouldn't be any repercussions, or at least they felt there wouldn't be any repercussions. I mean, certainly some of them are facing some consequences now, but it was a real consequence-free zone for many, many years. And so, I think in terms of correcting that, the players union now has a collective bargaining agreement with the league, so that there are a lot more processes in place to report this kind of awful behavior. But there's still a lot of work to be done, and there are reporting mechanisms that need to be put in place, because too often these accusations were brought to people's attention, and whether it was at the federation level or the league level or the club level, these officials turned a blind eye. And so it's going to be interesting going forward to see what kind of accountability there's going to be for these individuals. I mean, obviously the coaches are gone, some of the federation officials are gone, but again, there are still owners and executives that are still in the league, and it's going to be interesting to see what accountability looks like for them. Will they be forced to sell their teams? Will they lose their jobs? That remains to be seen. And there is a companion investigation that's being conducted by the league and the players union. I'm told that the results of that are going to come out in a month or so. So, we'll see if that investigation sheds any new light. But I think most of all, it's going to provide some detail in terms of, how the individuals who turned a blind eye to this are going to be disciplined.
You touched on something which is worth just teasing out for a moment, because certainly over here we look upon the American League as the best in the world, the highest standard, and for there is Megan Rapinoe and Alex Morgan and these kind of global stars. But the reality is that this league is full of less heralded players earning meagre wages at times, and you mentioned there that it's in a precarious financial state in some ways. So it seems for a lot of the players there was a fear of doing anything which might disrupt their chance of playing pro soccer, of getting to have a pro career. Like, we don't want to bring down this league by speaking out and it being torn apart at the seams. And so the phrase open secret was used quite a few times in this report, Jeff. A number of the chapters across the various case studies, certainly one of them is called open secret. That phrase was used by a lot of the players.
Yeah, it was. And part of that was because they would make these complaints and then nothing would ever happen. And of course, players talk and agents talk, and word gets around. But there was never any accountability. Or for too many years there was no accountability for these coaches. And all the while, these players are trying to forge careers. They're trying to enjoy being professional players and playing the game that they love. And yet their fate was in the hands of these coaches who often, doubled as sporting directors and were making decisions about not only who played, but at the end of the season, who stayed and who went. So you had a lot of power kind of concentrated in one individual within an organization in terms of players. And so these players were put in a position where they felt like they had to toe the line. They had to do what the coach said, even if it meant, being forced to engage in just abhorrent behavior on the part of the coach. So, again, it was just an untenable situation, and certainly the dam burst about a year ago. But there's been a steady progression of stories, just highlighting how these coaches behaved and just the horrible things that they did. And again, I think having the union in place will help. Having these reports out there will help. But keep in mind, the NWSL is run by its owners. And so the onus is really going to be on them to institute meaningful reform at the league level. And do they have the wherewithal and the will to force some of these other owners to sell who have been found to have aided and abetted this kind of abuse?
Yeah, I mean, on the NWSL and the owners, I mean, you mentioned one of the instances, and again, we're just talking about 3 case studies here, and so I think we can deduce a wider prevalence. But one team conducted an investigation. You mentioned this story at the outset, an investigation that lasted 1 week. The accused coach was promptly fired. That team didn't inform their players or other teams or the public about the reason for that coach's termination, and he was later hired by another team in the league. So the failure at the top level is every bit as egregious as what was going on at ground level, and one wonders how those NWSL owners, well, I mean, are they criminally negligent, I suspect, is a question which will be asked very soon, but how they can claim to have the faith of anybody right now?
Well, some of them definitely not. But there is kind of a new generation of owners that has come on board in the last year. I'm thinking of Alexis Ohanian with Angel City FC. I'm thinking of Chris and Angie Long in Kansas City. And the Longs have invested $135 million in building a new stadium and a new training facility for their team. And theyese are business people. They're not doing this out of a sense of charity or this is a social cause. I mean, they're in it to make money. And so I suspect, and time will tell with this, that they're not going to stand idly by and watch their investment be ruined based on the actions of a couple owners who didn't seem to see anything wrong with having abusive coaches in their midst. So, I think that's where the real tug of war is going to take place within the NWSL. It's going to be at ownership level, and do enough of these new owners, are they really going to hold some of these older owners? Are they going to hold their feet to the fire and say, you got to go? Certainly there's a lot of compelling evidence to say that they should, but we've seen in other American sports, just thinking about the NFL and Dan Snyder, who's the owner of the Washington Commanders, the bad behavior in that organization has been highlighted as well, and yet he's still around. So again, it's going to be interesting to see just how much will there is within the league ownership to get rid of some of these bad actors.
Did Sally K. Yates explain why, or Q. Yates explain why the case study focused in on these three coaches? Was it just to establish that and prove a wider point, or were there fewer allegations elsewhere? Were these the most egregious cases, or why just those three particularly focused on, Jeff?
Well, I think those were the three most egregious cases, and I think there was already a lot of reporting on two of them. So I think, they found, or I think they hoped that by starting there, that they would be able to dig deeper and also a little wider. And certainly that was the case with the Louisville coach. But there were other instances of coaches being fired for verbally abusive behavior. But again, when you cross the line of sexual abuse, I mean, I think that obviously is just beyond the pale and is something that just has to be addressed. I mean, certainly there's I think the excuse that we used a lot of times, well, it's tough coaching, when it comes to like verbal abuse. But when it comes to potential crimes against individuals and someone's body, I think that takes it to a whole nother level. And I think that's why Sally Yates chose to focus on those three cases. Okay,
because she did, and again, I haven't read the full report, but she did have a chapter at one stage about just the suspect basic working conditions for a lot of these players. Like I said, this league isn't flush with money necessarily, so she made the point in her report that there aren't minimum standards when it comes to facilities or housing where the players stay, and so in a lot of instances there's no HR personnel available to the players, and as you referenced as well, the coach therefore almost takes on a disproportionate level of power. He is coach, he is director of football, he decides contracts, he decides salary, and so can almost run riot as opposed to a better resourced environment.
Absolutely. A lot of these clubs were run on the cheap, and there were not really minimum financial standards established in terms of making sure that an owner or prospective owner had the requisite financial backing to really fund this operation. Sometimes they provided housing. I know that in the case of Chicago, the owner owned apartment buildings and would have the players stay in those buildings. And there were varying degrees of complaints about the state of some of those apartments, whether there was mold or whether there was, leaky pipes or what have you. So, again, it was started on a shoestring, and it continued that way for many years. And I think that environment as well kind of contributed to what happened.
Jeff, what's your sense of where this goes on a few fronts now? Does the Yates report prompt a full report into every single club? Will this get legal for certain individuals? One presumes a report like this, it tends to prompt further testimony and others tend to come forward.
That's interesting. I mean, it's a good question because obviously with the Portland and North Carolina coach, those details have been out for a year now. And I have not heard of any kind of legal or criminal ramifications, for that particular individual. These cases are very difficult to prove. At least they have been historically. And so, even with all the compelling evidence that there's been offered by these players, yeah, again, I have not heard of any kind of criminal investigation that has taken place. Again, I point back to the other investigation that's going to come out, conducted by the league and the players union. It's a joint investigation. So, I think the next shoe to drop is really what are the findings of that, and what are the recommendations of that, especially in terms of, again, of sanctioning owners, or forcing them to sell, or firing executives, et cetera. The USSF is taking some measures to try to fix as much as they can on their end. They're going to, I think, change the coaching licensing requirements. I mean, it used to be kind of a diploma, like once you got it, you had it for life. Now there's going to be, I think, a recertification process, like a yearly or every other yearly recertification. I think there is a real movement afoot to have better vetting of these coaches, because some of them, in some cases, the credentials of some of these coaches was minuscule. I mean, one individual claimed that they had an A coaching license, which I think is like the second highest license you can have from the USSF, and it turned out he didn't. I mean, a lot of it just took place by word of mouth, word of mouth recommendations, and then the person would be hired. So I think that's going to be tightened up. But, Cindy Parlow-Cone is the president of the U.S. Soccer Federation. She admitted that the federation is kind of limited in terms of what they can do. I mean, granted, it's up to them to sanction the league or not. And when I say sanction, I mean give them permission to operate. But that, holding back that sanction, that's not really a practical suggestion. I mean, they don't want to kill the league. So, and Parlow-Cone admitted that, they have some influence, but they don't have any real power to force some of these changes at the league or club level. So again, it's I keep coming back to, it's going to be down to the league to kind of clean house and put things in order, and we'll see the extent to which they have the will to do that.
A final thought then. So I do appreciate that these allegations in the main are not new, and we did see the protest this time last year, but it does seem terribly incongruous that it'll just be business as usual, and let's see how the next round of fixtures go without some kind of protest on the players' part or some kind of acknowledgement of what's happened here.
Well, the fans in Portland have already put out a statement this morning, U.S. time, saying that they are kind of severing relationships or severing relations with the front office. Whether that turns into a full-blown boycott is still to be determined. I mean, they're kind of caught in a bind as fans. I mean, they want to support the players who have taken the brunt of this abuse, but they're also reluctant to give money to an owner who clearly doesn't get it. So, it's going to be interesting to see, in terms of the fans, what they decide to do. I do keep coming back to the fact that there's a functioning players union now. I mean, without a collective bargaining agreement, a lot of these processes in terms of filing reports about abuse were not really codified at league level or at the union level, and now they are. So I think that's one change that's already taken place that I think will influence behavior in the future. But yeah, there's still a lot of unanswered questions about exactly what's going to happen down the road. I think, the players, we'll see if they engage in some kind of protest. I think it was a year ago that all the players, who were playing in a game stopped in the 6th minute and locked arms in the middle of the field. And that was a really powerful protest, I thought. But again, there have been so many incidents that have been reported now. I think there's a legitimate question of where does this all end? You hope this is the last of it, but we'll have to wait and see. But in terms of what the players can do, it's unclear to me what else they can do that they haven't done already.
Jeff Carlisle, soccer reporter with ESPN. That's great, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, guys.